So I know a lot of you guys are probably going around clicking on reviews for Good Boy wondering, does the dog die? And I'll go ahead and tell you right now that I'm going to reveal that at the end of this video, so stick around, but for now, let's get into the review. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well, and thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to click here on another video, where today we're going to be talking about a brand new film I got to check out a little bit early, thanks to those kind of folks over at IFC Films and Shudder for sending me over an early screener, and that film is called Good Boy. This is the feature-length directorial debut for Ben Leonberg, who wrote this film alongside Alex Cannon, and stars the dog Indy, as well as Jensen, Arielle Friedman, and more. So when I first heard that this film was coming out, saw the poster, saw the trailer, I was pretty intrigued. If you guys have been following this channel, then you'll know that I'm a huge fan of things like Scooby-Doo or Courage the Cowardly Dog. So the idea of a dog at the center of a horror story where he's watching his family be horrified is pretty interesting. And while this film by no means is within the same tone of Scooby-Doo and Courage the Cowardly Dog, it just pulled me in ever so slightly more. And I'm happy to say that this is probably one of the most unique horror films I've probably ever seen, and definitely one of the most unique horror films I've seen in 2025. But before we get into my thoughts on the film as a whole, let's get into what this film is all about. Good Boy tells its horror story through the eyes of Indy, a dog who moves into a farmhouse with his owner Todd, and while Todd sees the new home as a fresh start, Indy begins to sense supernatural forces that no one else can see or hear. Haunted visions, cryptic warnings, and spectral presences push Indy to protect his humans from malevolent entities who have intent on dragging Todd into darkness. And I'm happy to start off this review by saying I found this to be a lot of fun. I thought Good Boy was a really solid, interesting film that does not overstay its welcome, clocking in at about 73 minutes. I think this is the kind of film that understands that it's kind of running off of a gimmick, but also does something interesting and fun when it comes down to filmmaking. And I want to start this off by praising the dog Indy, who is actually the real life dog of the director of this film. And first of all, it's just absolutely adorable and was the main reason that you continue to watch the film and feel entertained. This is also an incredibly well-trained dog, and I just really enjoyed seeing this dog throughout the course of the film, because one thing to also praise outside of the dog's incredible performance that should win an Oscar is the fact that the film doesn't really utilize a lot of CGI. There are a couple of moments with some of the ghosts that you see in the film that utilize some visual effects, as well as a fox that you see in the distance for a moment that was visual effects. But when it comes down to the dog at the center of the film, there's no CGI used, and so everything is really built around the fact that this dog is very well trained and clearly is being directed in just the right ways to make you believe that the dog is seeing, spooky things in the house or is intrigued by a specific location. And I would have just loved to have seen the behind the scenes of what they needed to do to get this dog to react the way that it does over the course of the film. And everything from the close-up shots when it comes down to the cinematography or the wide shots really takes you on this adventure with Indy. And so yeah, really loved Indy in this film. Adorable. Kind of reminded me of my dog that passed away a few years ago, Charlie, which both made me happy but sad at the same time. But yeah, this dog was absolutely adorable. And it's kind of interesting because as a horror film, I would say this is pretty run-of-the-mill horror, right? Like you've seen a similar premise before. Family moves into a home. The previous owners who lived there had some sort of evil things going on to them too. Now the new people who are living there are experiencing this whole situation. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say that this film really breaks new ground when it comes down to the narrative. I don't think you're going to walk away from this film really engrossed and thinking, oh my God, what a great story. But when it comes down to the unique promise of a dog at the center of the movie, I think it really pays off, and it does some really interesting things in terms of filmmaking to really put you into that lens. The cinematography is a huge part of that because most of the film is shot at the eye level of the dog Indy, and there's a couple of shots that are a little bit wider, but for the most part, most of the film is shot within that kind of eye level of the dog, which did some interesting things. And one of the most interesting things that it does is you never really see the faces of any of the humans in the film, most notably his owner. Throughout the course of the film, the most you'll see is maybe his mouth or his jawline, but you won't really see the owner's face throughout the course of the film, and that goes for the rest of the humans that you see in the film as well. Most of the film really wants to lock you in solely on Indy and their journey, and I think that it made for a really interesting looking film in terms of cinematography. And it's not cinematography that has a lot of motion, but it does some pretty interesting things with lighting and the way that things things are framed to give you that cool, creepy, eerie vibe, but a lot of times also just give you really cute moments. I mean, especially the really up close shots, or the shots that are kind of giving you this weird side eye from the dog where he's seeing something, a side eye that if your dog gave it to you in real life, you'd probably laugh, which did make me chuckle while watching it. But in the context of a horror film, I thought just made it even more interesting. And again, I really got to praise the team behind this film, the director, who obviously has trained Indy very well, because there's just so much about this film that really impressed me when it came down to the dog. How did you get the dog to be so interested in something for a moment, and then, you know, a spectral presence will pass by, and then the dog is following that eye line perfectly and goes off on an adventure, and moments where the dog had to be scared or the dog had to bark at things. You know, you can tell that they took good care of the dog, but they did a really good job of allowing you as a viewer to really believe the performance from this dog, especially as he's going around and he's seeing creepy things. And so whatever they did on set to get the dog to do all these things, I thought was really interesting. And I think this is one of those films that a lot of people are going to want to see the behind the scenes of. And so yeah, between solid cinematography, the dog's performance, and just like this unique premise, you just have a film that is different and fun to watch and engaging, and like I already said earlier, doesn't really overstay its welcome. Now, as I mentioned though, the narrative isn't anything grand, and so I do think that some people will think that the shorter runtime kind of holds the film back from being better. But I think I'm of two minds of this, because it's one of those situations where had the film been longer, maybe could have overstayed its welcome, maybe just felt more and more gimmicky as the film was playing out, but you do sacrifice a more expanded story. However, I think that on the flip side, I appreciated the fact that the film was shorter simply because it felt like it didn't overstay its welcome and it understand exactly what the assignment is. And in terms of the story, while it does feel like pretty generic paranormal home kind of stuff, what I enjoyed about the film in terms of its underlying tones is that we learned that the house that they're in also had the previous owner who had a dog, and that owner was sick the same way that Todd, Indy's owner in this film, is sick. And so I do think that while the film has a supernatural element, there is an underlying tone or theme about the idea of a dog witnessing their owner be sick and become sicker and sicker and not really understand what's going on, and maybe eventually realizing that their owner is gone and having nobody to rely on. And I thought that was an interesting underlying theme. I don't know if I'm pulling that out of my ass or not, but I thought that was an interesting thing to pull from the film. But overall, I really appreciated a lot about this film when it came down to how it was made and the great performance from Indy. It made for a really fun, entertaining horror film. Not one that I could say I'd be revisiting on my own very often, but the kind of film I could see myself throwing in front of somebody else and, you know, being like, hey, check out this really interesting horror film, or one of those films that I can just say right now, I do recommend for big horror heads who just want to see something different. You know, in the world of horror, there's a lot of samey stuff out there, and sometimes people just want to see something different. And while I would say that this film is more adorable than it is scary, it does some interesting things to definitely give itself, you know, its own identity and give itself a creep factor for sure. And so with all that said, overall, I do recommend Good Boy. I think go in with tame expectations narratively. I don't think you're going to be blown away in that department. But in terms of filmmaking, in terms of a unique premise, in terms of a directorial debut, taking a unique premise like this that could have just come across flat out gimmicky, I think that the director did a great job. Clearly, he has an incredibly well-trained dog and understood the assignment. I appreciated the shorter runtime, and I appreciated that they delivered on the promise of a horror film with the dog at the center of it. That is actually a believable performance from this dog. And the last thing I'll say, though, that is probably my biggest gripe in the film, it's the one thing that bugged me the most, is that there is a chance, there is one moment in this film where they can say the title of the film, Good Boy. It's near the end of the film, and instead they say, Good Dog. And it just bothered my wife and I so bad. As soon as the movie was over, I go, really? They utilized that moment to say Good Dog instead of Good Boy, like the title. And I think it's going to be like one of the main things that bothers me about this movie moving forward. It's just like they missed that perfect opportunity to say Good Boy. Not a huge gripe, but one that is, it just stands out to me. It's one of those things that just kind of irks me more than it is that's something that really ruins the movie. But with all that said, I'm going to give you a quick spoiler warning now. So that is your spoiler warning, where I'm going to reveal whether or not the dog dies in the film for those of you who are curious. So with that said, 1, 2, 3, here we go. Indy does not die. You do not have to worry. The dog doesn't even get hurt in the film, really. There's a couple of moments where he's scared, or you can tell that he was uncomfortable. I don't know if the dog actually was, or if they just caught him in good moments where he was, you know, coming across that way. But whatever the case may be, he's never hurt or killed in this film. However, I do think it's important that you know, we see elements of the previous owner who lived there before, and that owner had a golden retriever. And so over the course of the film, Indy does see a spirit of this golden retriever and eventually finds the remains of that golden retriever. And it's not like a dog that's just dead there. It is like the bones of the dog with a bandana around the neck to let you know this is the same dog you've been seeing kind of in these spectral moments. So you don't just flat out see that dog die or see a full-blown like dead dog there decomposing. You just see the bones. And so that's just something to know for anybody who is sensitive to that kind of thing. But yeah, Indy himself does not get hurt or die in this film. So that's going to be my thoughts on Good Boy. Leave some comments down below. Did you guys like this film? Are you planning on checking it out? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.